I'm going to turn it over to you first, though.
Yes.
We're live, but give us a minute.
Yeah, I see people coming through now. We're populating now.
Okay, you're holding at 32. You could probably start now.
Okay, welcome everybody to the South Whitby School District Board of Education meeting for July 22nd. It is with a heavy heart for all of us this evening to begin this meeting in remembrance of the loss of one of our Falcon family members. And I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Mocha to bring us up to date on what we know.
Thank you, Dr. Hadden. Yes, we lost Taylor Daniels, a rising senior, in a tragic car accident on Monday. He was loved by certainly his family and his friends. He always had a smile on his face, and he will be greatly missed. And I would just like to take a moment of silence to remember Taylor, and our hearts go out to his loved ones. Thank you. Back to Julie.
Thank you, Dr. Mocha. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes and as presented?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. We have two presentations this evening. The first one is policy 0001, and this is a first read of the equity and inclusion policy that we had spoken with our superintendent and discussed at our board meeting at the end of June. I would like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that there is no vote that is taken on this policy this evening. However, we welcome your comments and we would ask that you please use the Q&A box at the far right-hand side of the bar at the bottom of the Zoom page. You'll see it, it says Q&A. When we use the Q&A, it then becomes part of the recorded Zoom meeting. And if you use the chat box when we close the Zoom meeting, it goes away and we don't have a opportunity then to capture that. And if you use the Q&A box, then we have it historically and we can make sure that everybody is responded to appropriately. So please put your comments in the Q&A and then they will be addressed under the superintendent section later on in the agenda. For the budget presentation, because it's a public presentation regarding our budget, it's a hearing, we're going to be suspending our business meeting at that point. You will again put your Q&A questions into the Q&A and we will address them as we go on into the public hearing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mocha and Andrea Downs.
Yeah, thank you so much. We do have one comment from Craig Sear that he'd like to speak, and I know that we have the Langley City Council's resolution that they passed. We weren't going to have speakers. We were going to be taking public comment, but certainly, you know, if the board wants to welcome a speaker, because he is a city council member, that would be up to the board. But I'm going to turn it over to Andrea really to walk through the policy and talk to us about how she got to this recommendation.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to just put a disclaimer out there that the policy that I have drafted, I had some input from community and district members that had reached out to me and just said, hey, these are some thoughts that we had. And where I felt like it was appropriate, I included that. I also looked at other districts around the state that had high levels of diversity in their district office and also in their student populations to look what their policies look like. But I will also say that all of that is to be said that I am a white heteronormative upper class female writing this policy, and that several of the factors that are addressed in this policy
I wonder if she knows that she's frozen.
Yeah, did we lose Andrea?
Yeah. There you go. You're back now.
I'm back. Where did I cut off? Oh dear.
Right at the beginning after you said white heteronormative.
Great. Okay. So with that to be said, I want to just recognize that I am a white heteronormative upper class female writing this policy, and that many of the portions of this policy that we are outlining and trying to address, I do not personally experience. And so this is my best go at writing an encompassing policy, but it is really critical for this to be effective that we have voices of other people who do experience this within.
Yep. We lost Andrea again.
These are the joys of Zoom meetings. At least we are not being Zoom bombed this week, and I'm
We
happy.
should have a hand signal that we can all do when somebody
Not a
goes
problem.
away so they can see that.
Oh, she's back.
You're back.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Yeah. Well, you got through that part, so let's talk through the policy, Andrea.
Okay. So the initial portion of it talks about just we're acknowledging that this is a systemic issue and that there are barriers built within our education system that prevent all people from participating fully. The second portion of the paragraph is just me talking about what we're defining in that diversity, so that we can use that word interchangeably throughout the rest of the document. And then I'm aligning the policy to our district mission and vision, because we did a huge amount of work around that last spring, and it was with this intent in mind. And so I thought this was a great place to pull it out. The policy breaks down into two different sectors. So the first one is about eliminating that systemic disparity, whether that be through training, how we're monitoring or implementing discipline, and then who are the stakeholders that we are seeking out to bring to the table. And the second portion is talking about, okay, once we have dismantled that, how are we ensuring equity moving forward? So this is where I'm touching on curriculum again, disproportionality, not just in negative contexts, but also in positive contexts. So looking at whether or not we have disproportionate numbers of students not accessing advanced placement or highly capable programming, all of those different things that we do. And hiring and recruiting. So part of what we know is that our hiring system and the education system of getting to a place where you are qualified to be hired participates in the same system that produces the inequities that we are trying to dismantle once you are hired. And so this is working at how do we start to break that down? How do we eliminate bias in our interview panels? How do we eliminate bias in our job descriptions? Where are we looking for candidates, and putting an intentional focus on that? The last portion of this is on implementation and monitoring. And in that, I just use what we typically used with these kinds of policies, which is that Joe will establish plans, procedures, kind of all of the in the weeds portions of this about how we will enact this, and then share out with us at a minimum of annually. And that would be done in a way that she thinks makes sense and is in alignment with the other work that we're doing in the district alongside this. Did I make it through all that?
You did. You did. You didn't freeze once.
Woohoo!
So comments from the board.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Andrea and congratulate her on putting together what looks to me as a white male heteronormative person to be a very comprehensive policy, a very good set of guidelines that we can extrapolate into actual action going forward within the district. So thank you.
Anyone else?
No, I echo what Brooke said. Amazing job, Andrea. Spot on. I appreciate all your hard work and effort into it.
You know, this is not an easy subject to be able to articulate and put it into writing. And it's going to be even more difficult to take this, which we will memorialize, and actually make sure that we're doing it, that it doesn't become like a strategic plan that sits in a 3-ring binder up on somebody's desk that's never used. So I think the intent here is truly admirable and great, and I would encourage all staff to get behind this 100%. It needs to be done. It's great work and an excellent start.
And I would also like to, echoing that, I'd like to encourage community members, staff, students, parents, everyone who has a different viewpoint on this. Please provide us feedback, as Andrea said, that we want to make this the best policy that we can to provide the best guidance, and we need input to do that.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, Dr. Mocha, is this the time to have our council member speak with us?
That's fine. We can certainly allow him. Oops. Yeah, let's allow Craig to talk. I just clicked on that.
So Craig Sear, Langley City Council person, we appreciate your attendance and your enthusiasm for a cooperative effort on such an important document, piece of work for all of our community.
So Craig, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak with us.
It looks like I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yes, we can.
All right. Let's see. I need to get my statement in front here. There we go.
Actually, we can bring it right up on the screen for you.
Oh, very good.
Your personal statement. We can bring the Langley statement up.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be wonderful if you could display that. First of all, well, good evening. My name is Craig Sear, and I am a Langley City Council member and also a privileged white male who has not experienced systemic racism. I greet all of you tonight in the context of the unprecedented challenges that our society faces writ large. I also think probably all of these crises seem to find a way to the doorstep of the South Whidbey School District. I speak of the climate crisis, the pandemic, which is the cause of a public catastrophic health and economic crisis, the rule of law crisis, and of course, the systemic racism crisis. And then on top of that, the 5 of you are tasked with figuring out how to safely do school for our children. And I really wish you well as you move forward. Tonight, I'm here to tell you of one initiative that the City of Langley is undertaking with regard to systemic racism. So this, let's see, a couple Mondays ago, July 6th, this Langley City Council unanimously passed a resolution titled the commitment to dismantling systemic racism and creating an anti-racist inclusive community. So I encourage you to read this resolution because it parallels your ongoing own equity and inclusion discussion, which I very much applaud. I produced this original draft of Langley's resolution with the help of Langley Councilmember Christy Caro, and we circulated it broadly to Langley and South Whidbey communities, specifically including people of color. And we received significant feedback that strengthened the resolution and also made it broader and deeper at the same time. And I'm not going to read the entire resolution, the whereas clauses, but I do want to call out several of the therefore clauses, which really are our commitments as a city. So therefore, the Langley City Council and Mayor will convene a multiracial, intersectional, anti-racist working group for the purpose of hearing the voices of community members impacted by policies and practices that contribute to systemic racism, injustice, abuse, bias, inequity, and compromise safety in the city of Langley. And therefore, the city of Langley will convene a series of public educational workshops for the benefit of city council members. And these workshops will be facilitated by a skilled professional BIPOC and will focus on educating on all aspects of systemic racism. And therefore, each department within the city of Langley shall scrutinize its internal systems, processes, documents that contribute to systemic racism. And we will also scrutinize in detail our public safety program, including the Langley Police Department, so as to understand the public safety needs of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, mentally ill, disabled, and LGBTQ+, and how best to meet those needs. Therefore, the city of Langley will engage and inform local schools, arts organizations, the business community, nonprofits, social justice organizations, churches, and other civic institutions on Whidbey Island of our intent to dismantle systemic racism. And therefore, the city of Langley will endeavor to support Black, Indigenous, people of color, mentally ill, disabled, and LGBTQ impacted by systemic racism. And therefore, the Langley City Council and Mayor declare their intent to repair damage caused by discrimination and racism and transform the city of Langley into an anti-racist, multicultural, inclusive community that is a place that celebrates diversity, affirms the humanity of all people, and addresses historic inequity and enables everyone to thrive. So, as you can see, we have high expectations of ourselves, and we also know it's going to be uncomfortable, particularly for those of us who identify as white, like I do. But we have no choice if we're to transform the community away from systemic racism and towards an inclusive community. Our next step is to budget appropriate funds to invest in this work, which is going to happen in August. As you've just heard, the city of Langley is ready to work with the South Whidbey School District on this important topic of battling systemic racism. In your deliberations, please keep that in mind. Happily, we already have a collaborative relationship. I note that the city of Langley is the site of many physical assets of the South Whidbey School District, which already significantly contribute to the community. Of course, I'm thinking of the South Whidbey Community Center and the important Readiness to Learn program in particular. I am so thankful that the South Whidbey School District is doing this important work. You can find the resolution on the city website, and I really want to thank you for having me tonight.
That's great, Craig. Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that the City Council is doing on behalf of the community. It's quite admirable. It's wonderful that you were so enthusiastic in reaching out to me and asking to be a part of this. We so appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any comments from the board before we move on? Okay, well, with that, then we will continue to work on this policy, and I believe it's going to be coming up for review in August.
Yeah, it will be on the workshop agenda for August, so that people can have a chance to comment. It'll also be on our website, so that people will be able to comment on it there as well.
Okay. All right, we do have one Q&A for that, and I believe you want to move it to superintendent's comment.
We did, it's one, so we can
You want to address it now?
Answer. Yeah. Basically, Carrie Whitney says, great start. It's hard to see the document. Will it be posted somewhere to review and give input? And the answer to that is yes. And it is on the website now. Certainly we can make it more prominent. And then she has a question for the board. Would the board consider having a racial and bias policy review from an outside review board of all our policies? We do work directly with the Washington State School Boards Association. I'm not sure if you want another external review, but they have an equity lens with which they're viewing policy, and you subscribe to that service. So I'm not sure if you want to do something beyond that.
Any more comments from the board on this? All right, then we shall move ahead with the budget presentation and keeping that concern from Carrie in the back of our mind about where to move forward with this in terms of looking at all of our policies. I think the first thing, Carrie, would be for the policy to be finalized and then see where the board wants to go from there. Okay, budget presentation. Dan, it's yours.
Good evening. Okay, yeah, good evening. This is the budget presentation for the 2021 fiscal year. There will also be a short presentation on a 4-year projection that spans from 2021 to 2024. Following that, it's a budget hearing and then hopefully the adoption by the school board. There's some legal requirements in creating a budget for a school district, and the first is the revised Code of Washington RCW that requires a hearing and adoption, which we're doing tonight. And there was notice giving in the Southwood Record in July at 2 different times that there would be a meeting tonight. And it allows for any person to be heard for or against any part of the budget that we are going to speak about. One of the fiscal requirements, another RCW, is that we have a balanced budget. And that basically means that a beginning fund balance plus revenue cannot be less than the expenditures. So we have to have a positive or at least a zero balance at the end of each year. We also have a board policy, 60/20, that mandates that we budget a 6% fund balance each year. It isn't that we carry it, it's that we budget it each year. So it's a way of rebalancing our budget to make sure that we do have an ending fund balance. And so that's the fiscal concerns that we have as we create the budget process. We also have our educational position that is really what the budget is supporting, and that's our vision, our mission, and our values of the district. So as we go through the budget, it should support the fact that we're trying to create lifelong learners who are multiculturally engaged, literate, active community members, and able to meet the challenges. And it meets our mission and our values. It should also support the learning goals for kids. And one I would point to is that our schools are welcoming, safe, and supportive. So when we talk about our facilities, maintaining facilities, upgrading facilities, we're creating a safe environment for kids. So these are the student aspects of building the budget. The budget is really about how do we support the educational program and the vision, mission, and values of our district. So a school district budget runs on a fiscal year, which is unlike a calendar year. It starts September 1st and it runs through August 31st. So this is one that will start September 1st, 2020. It's still a working document and will be until the board actually approves it, which is hopefully later tonight. So we could change things if you choose at this point. A little bit about school district accounting, because it's a little different than your home checking account. It's governmental accounting and it's consisted of different funds. And there are 5 funds that we budget for, and each of those funds must be self-balancing. So it basically means that they have their own set of assets, liabilities, equities, revenues, expenditures, etc. And generally, if you think about it, they don't interconnect. So the general fund, we'll talk about it predominantly tonight, is our largest fund, but there's also the capital projects fund, a debt service fund, the student body fund, and a transportation vehicle fund. The general fund, it's the largest fund that we do have. We're predicting a budget tonight of $21,290,425, and it's financed from local, county, state, and federal sources. It's the one fund that we have the most leeway in how we spend our money. It's not specified by statute. And generally, these revenues are for the operating expenses of the district. So it's going to be our instructional programs, it's going to be staff salaries and benefits, food service, transportation, maintenance, administration, athletics, all those type of programs that we operate. And every school district must have a general fund. It's the only fund they have to have, but they must have one. We also have 4 other funds we'll talk about briefly tonight. First is Capital Projects Fund, and this is actually funded by a property tax. So we get a little more than $2.2 million a year for capital improvements. And this is used to improve our buildings, grounds, remodeling, roofs, carpets, heating, cooling systems, and technology. There's also a debt service fund, and ours is actually quite small. Normally, debt service funds are for the repayment of bonds. So if you're going to build a school and you borrow $50, $100, $300 million, it's paid back through the issuance of bonds and the debt service. For us, it's really being used to pay back an energy upgrade loan from the state of Washington. And it's a very small fund and it will actually expire in about 4 years. The third fund is the Student Body Fund, and it's a special revenue fund, which basically means that it's restricted to a very specific purpose. I would say it's funds that are raised by students for the use of students for non-credit extracurricular events. So it's, you know, athletics and clubs and all those things that are not part of our normal educational program. And then there's the Transportation Vehicle Fund, and that is strictly for the purchase and repair of our big yellow school buses. And it's funded by depreciation. So as we buy a bus, and they're $150,000, the state will reimburse us over a period of 13 years for that $150,000, and we use that money to buy more buses. And certainly, if the board has questions as we go along, you know, stop, or if I'm not clear on something, you know, ask questions. So we're building a budget. In the fiscal components of it, there's really 5 things that, you know, are important in this budget process and that drives the whole thing. And the first is student enrollment. It is the #1 aspect of building a budget in the state of Washington. Our funding is predicated upon students. So it drives the revenue. It also drives our staffing needs. And then our staffing needs drives our expenditures, because 87% of our budget is actually staffing costs. And then the final aspect is fund balance. Think of it as your savings account. It's money that we can use if our revenue doesn't quite reach our expenditures, and it's money we save. And we have that policy that says we will have at least a 6% fund balance. So that's one of those requirements that we continually come back to. So student enrollment, can't talk about that enough in this process. It really drives the state funding. Roughly every student we have in our district generates $10,000 in revenue for the district. So that's why it's so important that we maintained our enrollment numbers. It also, as we look at our enrollment, you can see some of the issues that we have because of that. State apportionment, this is what they refer to as guaranteed funding, but it's not guaranteed until June of the end of each year. We start the year using our budget estimates. So if we estimate that we have 1,250 kids, they will pay us based upon those estimates from September to December. In September, we start reporting our actual enrollment numbers. And once we hit January, they use the actual enrollment to recalculate how much money we're going to receive. And if they use student FTE, and FTE is basically if you're there every day, all day, you're a 1.0. If you come half the day, you're a 0.5, and you get funding based upon those percentages. So it has nothing to do with head count. We could have, 2,000 head count, but only 1,200 FTE. But the thing about this is that the funding itself is actually adjusted up or down starting in January, and they do that every month until we hit June. So it's not until we get to June that we know what our actual revenue was for the previous 9 months. So it's one of those things that we have to be really careful about. And I know we talk about enrollment a lot. Well, that's the reason. If we overestimate too much, they're going to reduce our funding come January, and we have to make adjustments. If we underestimate, they increase our funding. So we look at the enrollment for the current year and previous years to try to figure out where we're going with next year. And this was the enrollment from the current 1920 school year. And you can see we ended up as an average of the September through June of about 1,253 FTE. Started in September with 1,283, ended in June with 1,245. You can see that there's kind of an average in there of where we ended. Also, I point out that we have a range of grade levels. Our smallest grade is currently second grade at about 74 students, and our largest is our sophomore class at about 116 FTE, and everybody else falls in between. So it gives you an idea of how large or small each of our grades are. When we look at projecting enrollment for the coming year, there's several ways we can do it. We could just roll over everybody in first grade to second grade. History tells us that is not an effective model. It never works that way. You will have changes coming into high school. You have changes in the junior class as they take running start. There's a variety of things that make this one not effective. We could do a straight cohort survival. We could take, you know, the number of kids that were in first grade that matriculated to second grade over a period of time and see how that works, or a weighted cohort survival, which is the same process, but we do it over multiple years, and we give the most weight to what is most current. So as we created the enrollment, we used a 3-year weighted model. So we used the last 3 years, and we weighted the most current year more than we did the year before, and that a little more than the year before that. So we look at those, and based on that particular model, we can see where we're going. And this is just a historical point. And what I wanted to point out is not that we have had a decline for 20 years, but if you look at the last 8 years, you can see the previous 4 years, starting in about 2014-15, fairly similar to what we're projecting for the next 4 years. So we're using the most current information as our projection. If we went farther back, that projection would be a steeper decline. So it's just a way of trying to figure out where we're going. So based on those projection models, we're looking at using 1,228 FTE for our enrollment funding model and building the revenue in this budget. Out of that, in the K4 North Campus, about 406 FTE. In the South Campus, between the K6 SWA program and the 5-6 program, you have another 27 and a half and 180, about 197 in the 7th and 8th grade, and then 389 in our basic 9-12 program, another roughly 30 in the SWA program at the high school. So that gives us our basic ed enrollment of 1,228. So when we use the different numbers, we have to project for basic education, and out of that basic education, we have about 4.5 kids that are doing the Spokane Virtual Academy program, which is an ALE program. We have 208 FTE in our special education program. And one thing you may notice this year is special education is age 3 to 21, not 0 to 21. So the 0 to 2 classification is no longer under OSPI. It has been moved to a different state organization, and so it no longer funnels through school districts. So that changed a little bit the numbers that we would project, because potentially we would have another 8-10 kids in that program that we would have projected last year. And then there's a Running Start program. It's been pretty consistent at about 29 FTE for the last few years. Our vocational program, or CTE program, as some people refer to it at the high school, 57 FTE, and our bilingual program, 11 FTE. So using those numbers, they calculate what our revenue will look like for the coming year. So a simple example of state apportionment is you take the number of FTE that we have determined and you multiply those using a prototypical school model, which has staffing ratios into it, and it creates funding that's identified as salaries, benefits, and MSOCs. And MSOCs are your non-employee costs, materials, supplies, and other costs. I want to point out that this is a funding model, not a staffing model. So as we talk about how much we receive through this and how many they fund. It has nothing to do with what any district in the state is actually staffing at. It really has to do with how they allocate their funding. And you'll see that it's an outdated model, but it is the one we use. So they refer to staffing units in their prototypical school model, and they have 3 classifications within that. They have your certificated instructional staff. So basically your teachers, librarians, anybody with a certificate that works in the school. You have your classified staff, and you have your certificated administrative staff, which is basically your principals and your central office administrators. The prototypical school model is a formula-based program that determines, based upon number of kids, how many staffing units they are funding. So if we look at an elementary with 400 kids, they would fund 1.253 certificated administrative staff, in this case be a principal because the building level, and they would have basically a half-time counselor for 400 kids. You can see that's probably not the way most districts are going to staff. They're not going to have a half-time counselor for 400 kids at an elementary school. So again, it's a funding model, not a staffing model. But what it basically does is it creates staffing units. And this is F203, and OSPI likes to use letters and numbers for all the reports, but it's basically a revenue projection. And so based on the number of kids we have, they think that at the K-6 level, we should be funded for 1.25 FTE and principals. And so they use those numbers, and then they use a salary amount to calculate how much money to generate. There's a couple things that they have changed over the years. They used to fund us based on a teacher's experience and education. And so that if we had a teacher that was at the beginning stages of their career, they would give us less money for that person than they would for those that are at the top of their career. They changed that and created a single salary amount across the state for each of those 3 categories. And then they added regionalization and experience in there to offset those changes. And what I want to point out with this one is that you will see that regionalization for South Woodby changes over the years. It's actually a regressive funding model for us. It started at 1.24%. Currently, it goes to 1.22 next year, then 1.20 and 1.18. So basically what that means, very simply, is that we will receive 2% less funding for the next 3 years than we did last year. So it decreases the amount of funding that we will receive over time, which makes it really difficult when you combine that with our enrollment situation. The other thing is, because of the experience of our staff, we are above the state average. We receive an additional 4% for certificated staff funding. So the way we look at this, they start with the state average. So every district in the state will receive the state average allocation. So if we use certificated instructional staff, they will fund at 67,585 for every staffing unit they determine that you have based on enrollment. And for us, they add the experience and the regionalization. So really, we will receive $85,157 for classified staff. And classified staff is quite often one that people are confused with, because they consider a classified person somebody that works 2,080 hours a year. So 8 hours a day, full year round. Most of our classified people don't do that. They work a lot less in their hours. So this one's a little confusing for some people when they say, well, I don't make anywhere near that and I work, full time, but you really don't if you don't work year round. And then the classified administrative staff. So they created number of staffing units based upon the enrollment. They've created a funding level. They multiply those 2 together in a lot of different categories. And this thing is, 80 pages long when you look at it at OSPI. But they start creating these salary amounts. So if we look at our certificate instructional staff based upon the number of FTE, the dollar amounts, they're going to say, we're going to generate $5.385 million for instructional staff. They do it for classified staff, they do it for administrative staff, a variety of other things. So they come up with a dollar amount. And then they add the benefits of that, FICA, Medicare, retirement, roughly 24% on each of those calculations. And that gives us, the first part of it. The other part is we also receive funding, again, based on the number of students for the non-employee costs, things for technology, utilities, insurance, curriculum, library, etc. So for every FTE, we receive roughly $1,314 for our basic operating costs. And those are for all the things other than our salary. So if you look at that and you multiply it by the number of students we project in each of those categories, you see it's about 1.5 million for our regular program. The thing that we need to understand about this is that it isn't actually adequate. And I can use utilities and insurance as a great example. We're receiving $436,000 for utilities and insurance. That might be close to covering utilities, but if we looked at insurance separately, that's $240,000. So it's about 50% less than we actually spend in those categories. So one of the reasons why there are local levies is situations like this. And then you add those all together and they come up with what our estimated revenue is. So based upon, a lot of different factors, I insert this into OSPI's system and it generates these dollar amounts, and this is what they will pay us based upon starting in September through December. And then in January, they will adjust these numbers based upon actual. So look at revenue. There's basically 5 sources of revenue for a school district's general fund. The first is our local property taxes. That's the amount that our community has generously agreed to pay. There's funds that are generated at the district level in the buildings. There's a state apportionment, which we just spoke about. And there's state funding, which is a categorical program, such as LAP, which is part of that funding process. And then there's federal funding. And when we talk about categorical programs, that basically means that if we get $100,000 for Title I, which is remediation, we have to use it for that purpose only. We can't use it for transportation. We can't use it for food service. We can't use it for anything else. It has to be used for that purpose. And if we don't use it for that purpose, we have to return it to the state or the federal government. So there are some requirements, and we are audited annually on whether we do that and whether we do it appropriately and all those type of things. So you can see that between the purple and the green, that's our state funding, which is the majority, probably 7% of our funding. The other large blue section is our local property taxes. So even though McCleary wanted to get away from the property tax inequity, there's still a large percent of state budgets or district budgets that are local tax revenue. One of the things we need to talk about is how do we use our local levy, and it's now referred to as an enrichment levy. We use it for athletic programs. If you look at the funding formula, you will see that there are staff that are not funded under that apportionment program, or there are staff that are underfunded. If we look at the amount we received in each of those classifications, you will find that we probably are paying more at the district level than we are receiving from the state level. So that's picked up with local levies. We talk about the MSOCs being underfunded, utilities and insurance, a great example of that one. We also support our food service program, our pupil transportation program, because the funding for those are not sufficient. And then anything we negotiate is not funded by the state of Washington. So if we have increases in our health insurance, if we have paid leave, vacation leave, tri-pay, additional time, anything like that, they're all additional costs that are paid out of the local enrichment levy. The other part of the levy is when we went out to the voters to ask them for these levies, we were able to ask for 24% of our budget, which was a little over $4 million. And that is what the community approved. Well, since then, they have changed the methodology where now we are limited to a dollar amount times student FTE. So it's $2,627 times the number of students. And you see that we can collect 3.3 million of the little over $4 million. So we will roll back or not collect from the community almost $680,000. The problem with this new way of looking at a levy calculation is it has nothing to do with what your expenditures are. It just has to do with the number of students you have, and they don't always correlate. And for us as a district, as your student population decreases, the amount that you can collect from the levy also decreases. And this is just a comparison over the last 3 years. If I would have gone to 17-18, it would have been over $4 million. Then it went to about 3.7, 3.3, and it pretty much will stay at 3.3 from now on, because the inflation in the rate almost mimics the decrease in enrollment for us. So it'll be very similar for the next several years. Then we have our local non-tax. This is our school district generated funds. The largest part of that is rental fees, say the community center, donations we receive from the community, our local food service fee. So if you're a student that pays the full price, that is local dollars, our traffic safety program, investment earnings, those type of things. So it's all generated at the school district level. The only real difference in here, if we look at all those categories, it's going to be community center rentals. As a result of the COVID, we're doing some rental relief and anticipate that'll probably continue. So we are budgeting less in revenue for that particular building, but we're also budgeting less expenditures. So we're tightening it on both ends of that. Otherwise, it's very similar to where we have been in the past, though investment income is going to drop because the rates that we're receiving have gone down dramatically as the economy has decreased. State apportionment, we've already talked about it. It's basically the number of kids we have times the staffing ratio generates dollar amount. And again, it's a funded amount. It's not a staffing amount. But if we look at those, you will see that our state general purpose of about 2.7 million is almost identical to what we have this year. So even though we have a few lesser kids, the rates went up with an IPD index, about 1.6%. So it offset those two. The next set is state categorical programs, special education, homeless student stability, bilingual, highly capable, our school food service. Those are all very similar. The only real difference is transportation reimbursement. And this is the amount we receive that actually pays for the operation of the buses, not for the purchase, but for the operation of the buses. The bus drivers, the bus gas, all those things that are in that. And you'll see that that number is predicated on a formula that is the number of miles driven times the number of kids that ride the bus. I did not expect less kids on the bus. It was just a change in state funding because they had a funding issue last year and overestimated the amount of money they were going to receive from the state of Washington to disperse, and they dispersed more than they had, so they had to hold back about $40 million in the coming year. So we're expecting with that number, same number of kids on the bus that we had in the current year, same miles driven, etc. Whether that happens in September, I don't know for sure, but if things are the same, that's the same dollar amount. But it will have an effect on transportation. We were almost balancing revenue and expenditure in transportation until we ran into this little bump in the road. And then we have our federal special purpose money. And these are programs. The first two are special education, our homeless program, title programs, which basically are remediation programs. They're all very similar, except there is the CARES Act or the ESSER funds that are coming. Some of that I can potentially collect in August, but I can wait to next year also. And that's the federal funds because of COVID-19. It's to hopefully pay for the additional costs that we will incur with product, PPEs, all the things that we will need to do, some of the planning costs, those type of things. The district doesn't get 100% of those funds. It is shared with private schools in our community, so there will be actually less of the district collects, but it is the difference that you will see in the federal funding. If it wasn't for that, it'd be very similar to where we have been in the past few years. So if we add all those together, we come up with $20,679,000, which you can see is less than the $21 million that we currently had budgeted. I am budgeting some grant capacity in there, and it's a revenue expense neutral. Basically means if we don't get the revenue, there will be no expense. There's nothing tied to that at this time, but it gives us the capacity in case there's something comes in that's unexpected. Maybe there's another federal grant that pops up because of COVID or something, without having to go back and redo a budget extension. So it's just, it's capacity more than anything else. So now we move into the expenditure side of it. And expenditures in our accounting system that we report to OSPI is categorized in 3 different ways. The first is by program, then by activity, and then by objects. So by program, you can see that about 54% of our funding is spent in our regular instruction, which is the basic education program, another 14.5% in special education, about 3% in our vocational program. The 4.4% grants is basically remediation, instructional remediation. Community services is community center, and then about 22.1% is support services. So that's everything that supports the instructional programs across the district, and we can look at what the breakdowns are. Kind of, there's a lot of different information in here, but I'll kind of look at the bold lines, the regular instruction, and just kind of highlight. In this budget, we tried to not affect the instructional program as much as possible because we had to make some reductions. And you'll see that in the regular instruction, there's actually an increase. In special education, there's an increase. In the vocational instruction, there's an increase. In grants, which is our remediation increase. And part of that's the CARES funding though. Other instructional programs and traffic safety, just as an informational piece, is a self-funding. So if they raise 60,000, we budget 60,000, and they balance over the years. So one year they may spend a little more, but then they have to reduce next year to balance, and they always have a positive cash flow going. But where you'll see changes is in community services. So because the community center, we're expecting it to have less revenue. We also decreased some of the expenditures that we had planned in there. And then support services. And that's where most of the reduction went, and that's district-wide costs. Again, trying to keep it away from instructional classroom costs. And we can talk about, as we get through these, I'll talk about how we got that dollar amount out of the district-wide support. There's certain categories that we can look at. And this is just a summary, and it's kind of all those different categories of, how is it that each of the programs has changed, and it gives you an idea over time what programs have grown or shrank or whatever. So activity is a different way of looking at things, and the state has different activities. The first is teaching activities. So 60% of our cost is the actual teaching of students. And then there's teaching support, the things that support the program, paraeducation, et cetera, another 9%, supporting activities at 16%, and then building administration at 6%, and central administration at 9%. And if we look at what those are broken up in, you can see the same type of categories and the details here, and you can certainly go back and look at it, but I think I'll jump to the summary page and just talk about each of the main sections. But if we use the teaching as an example, you can see that the teaching costs went up about $455,000, $487 for teaching extracurricular, which is predominantly stipends for things outside of athletics, et cetera. And that's probably a transportation cost reduction, thinking that we may not transport as much as we did in the future. And then support, learning resources is going to be, librarians, and you have counselors, and you have health services and professional development and all those type of things. So it gives you an idea of what those different breakdowns are. And then the supporting activities, and this is where you can get a little more detail, though I will summarize it at the end, but a little more detail where those changes are. So food service down about $21,000. We pay our food service management company based on the number of meals we serve. Anticipating we're going to have a few less meals, we're going to pay less dollars to the food service management company. The operations for transportation, as I went through the costs this year in operating the school buses, I found areas that we didn't spend money that I thought we could reduce for the coming year. What this doesn't take into account is what type of program we look at next year. Okay, so if we go to a hybrid, or if we go to a distance learning, that's going to change these things. This is predicated upon we're operating pretty similar to what we did this year. So those situations aren't really in this budget. And then, you know, things like maintenance of buildings, utility costs. As I started to go through the utility costs, comparing them current year to previous years, you know, realizing that no matter which way we operate, we can probably reduce those utilities some, just because of the way we're going to be set up next year. You see that insurance actually went up $49,000. Again, not one of those that we have a lot of control over, but that's liability insurance, insurance for transportation, vehicles, buses, etc. Information systems, we reduce the cost, and I'll explain how we got those savings again. Some of this is transfers, and some of it is actual reductions. None of this has to do with laying people off, though. I want to be real clear on that. You know, we do have one position that's vacant that we didn't fill in this budget, but this isn't assuming that people are working less next year. This was based upon the same number of people doing the same jobs that they did in the current year. So again, that's how this budget was built. Building administration up a little bit, central administration down a little bit, total expenditures. So if you look at those, you'll see that, you know, anything that had to do with teaching actually increases. Supporting activities is where we tried to make any reductions as we went through the budget process. And we had to make reductions. As we look at our revenue expenditure and the projections for the future, you'll see that, you know, we have to continually adjust our budget every year to try to align our expenditures more closely to what our revenue looks like. And then we can look by object code. And this is a kind of a broader look at things, and it's basically employee costs and non-employee costs. So we have certificated employees, our instructional staff at 43.5% of our budget, our classified staff at 17.5%, and employee benefits at 24.8%. And then 5% for supplies, 8.5% for services, and about a 0.1% for travel. So it gives you the big, broad picture of how do we spend our money. And this is just, you know, what does those categories look like over the last 6 years? So it gives you a comparison of, you know, how these budgets are changing over time. But the bottom line is when you look at this, you can see that 86% of our costs are employee costs and only 14% are non-employee costs. So again, students dictate the staffing needs, staffing dictates expenditures. So based on that, this is where we currently are. And you can see that in here, there's the categories that we actually reduced was classified salaries, services, and travel, that everything else actually increased a little bit. So where did those expenditure reductions came from? Well, 2 of them was from legal fees and election fees. And those are board costs that show up in the school board budget. Looked at the legal fees, and, you know, this year we haven't spent a lot of money on legal fees. So anticipating that, you know, don't see anything on the horizon, we could reduce that. Also the election fees, we also had budgeted in there for election fees that we didn't spend, so reduce those. Community center rental going down, so we tried to tighten up the costs in there. Looked at building utilities and really scrutinized where we are year to date, where we expected to be by the end of the year, and realized that between, you know, electricity and water and all those things that we most likely will not use as much utilities in the coming year. There are some contracted services that are no longer needed at the district level. Food service fees going down from Chartwell's because fewer meals being served. And then the expectation that based upon the fuel costs this year, even with driving buses to providing meals and all those things, our fuel costs was down from where we expected it was going to be. On the classified salaries and benefits, we do have an unfilled position, a maintenance position that we didn't fill. And then we have 2 contracts that partially we funded the capital projects fund. We have our facilities director who is doing a lot of capital projects works right now. Matter of fact, there's a couple things on the agenda tonight for the elementary school that he's been working on, and then our technology. So we moved some of those costs into capital projects, which are allowable by RCW to, help reduce the amount that we have in this particular budget. This is just a quick summary, a very, high-level summary of what our staffing enrollment has looked like for the past several years. And you can see that our enrollment in 15-16 was 1339. We're projecting it to be 1228 in the coming year. Certificated staff at 86.49. That includes administrative certificated staff and classified staff at 58.17. So about 145 FTE. That's not headcount, but that is actual FTE. I do have to do this disclosure as part of the budget process. And I have to tell you how much we receive from the state for MSOCs, materials, services, and other costs, and it's about 1.6 million. We spend about 1.7 million, so our levy is funding about $114,000 of that category. The other funds we budget are capital projects, debt service, ASB, and transportation vehicle fund. So the capital projects can be used for modernization, remodeling of buildings, and technology. So those are the two broad areas that we can use funding for, and we use it about 50-50. So our revenue comes from our local property taxes. So we have a revenue of about $2,255,000. Out of that, we are going to spend about 1.5 million on the buildings and about 1.4 million on technology. And again, that fluctuates between those two because all you're really doing is approving the total expenditures and not the building technology aspect of it. So if something changes and we have a big need in one area, we can modify that a little bit. We are also transferring $84,500 out of capital projects into debt service. So that is a fund transfer because we have no revenue generation capacity in debt service, but we have a payment that comes out of that, and it's required by state law to come out of the debt service fund. You'll see that the expenditures exceed the revenue, and that's because there's a beginning fund balance that we will carry forward of $832,000 from the current year. So we have projects in there, but we have money still to carry forward. So if we add the beginning fund balance of $832,500 to the 2.2 million and spend 2.9 million, we'll end the year with about $85,000 as an ending fund balance. So that's the capital projects. Debt service, we're going to transfer the $84,500 in from the capital projects fund. We have an expenditure payment of $70,000 for the principal on the loan through the state of Washington, and interest of about $15,500, and we'll end up with basically a non-existent balance at the end of the year. We basically just transfer enough in to cover the cost of it. And if we look at the cost, you'll see that our current balance is about $310,000 on that loan, and within 4 years it will be paid off, and we will no longer have that, but we'll continue to have those energy upgrade savings that we have been. So if you look at these, you'll see that, it's anywhere from, depending on the year, $80,000 to $100,000 in payments, but we've been saving that dollar amount. So the actual energy savings has been greater than the principal and interest payments on those. Plus we have buildings that are much nicer to live in. ASB fund. It consists of the general student body, athletics, classes, clubs. So this is all the money that is generated by students and then is spent by students. This budget is holding a place right now because we had no students in the spring. They need to really create this budget. So I've created a budget to hold a place for them. And then when we come back at some point, I will meet with the ASB officers and we will work through an actual budget that is probably more accurate to what they really want to do, because they need to create the funding, approve the expenditures, that type of thing. Transportation vehicle fund. This is depreciation, so we're expecting about $92,000 in depreciation next year, which will leave us a balance of about 305,000 with our ending year balance of this year. So that will give us the ability to buy potentially 2 school buses next year. So we'll be looking at bringing that to you at some time in the late fall. And this is just a summary with a several year history. You can see again, the general fund, by far our largest fund at about $21.3 million, followed by capital projects at 2.9, the ASB, Transportation Vehicle Debt Service Fund. So it gives you an idea of our budgets. The other thing I find information about this is really if you look at general fund and you look at the size of the fund over time, that's the only correlation that makes any sense, because capital projects and the other funds really don't. It's really determined upon activity and funding and those type of things. This is just a certification page that you get, and it shows the beginning fund balance, the revenue, the expenditure, and the ending fund balance for each of those funds. And what we're really looking for is that the ending fund balance is at least 0 or positive. It cannot be a negative number by state law. So it's one of those things that it's just a quick check on it. Then we get into the 4-year projection. And before we start this, I'm going to be real honest with you that I can't predict September, let alone 3-4 years from now. So as we walk through this, take it with a grain of salt. It is a requirement that the state legislature wanted so they could see how school districts were doing. But it's not an accurate picture, and I'll explain that as we get into it. So first they want enrollment projections. So if we looked at enrollment pattern, we are at 1257 for 2021, then 1237, 1219, and about 1202. So it continues at that same level as of the previous 4 years. The staffing, there's no way to predict what our staffing looks like next year or the year after or the year after. We have our staffing for 2021. We're at 86.493 certificated staff and 58.173, but staffing changes every year based on needs of students and a variety of reasons. So for this particular purpose, I just left staffing at the same number, knowing that it will be adjusted up or down based upon actual need. For revenue, I just increased by 1%. And normally revenue is increased by whatever IPD is, implicit price deflator. For 2021, it's 1.6, but there's talk that there may not be any increase for the following year. Again, for this purpose, an increase of 1%. And you can see that it goes from 20,779,000 to 20,054,000 over time. So you see a decrease in our revenue, and there's reasons for that. If we increase expenditures at that same rate, you can see that it goes from 21,290,000 to 21,935,000. So basically what we have is something that looks like this. We have revenue that declines and expenditures that would increase. So predicated upon this, we're going to see a budget presentation that says we have a negative fund balance at the end of 4 years. And so that our fund balance goes from 2.4 to 1.4 million to a negative 1.9. But you have to be real clear and understand that this can't happen, okay? This is what needs to happen, and this is what happens over time. We can use fund balance to some degree, but we have to keep it at 6%. So eventually we have to stop using fund balance. What we have to do is decrease expenditures, and we do this every single year. If you look at our budgets in the spring, we start talking about if we just roll things forward, it's going to be this dollar amount, and then we go, well, revenue isn't that high, we have to adjust things. So, that $1.8 million negative fund balance, first, it legally can't happen. And second is we don't operate that way. So we make adjustments every year. And by making these smaller adjustments each year, then you can get there. Again, required to have a balanced budget and required to have a fund balance. So that's why we make those adjustments. As an example, if you look at our 18-19 budget 2 years ago, we did a 4-year projection. And for 2021, based upon that same scenario, we were going to have $297,000. We've modified our budget in those 2 years, and we currently have, with a little bit of help because of not operating the way we normally would, we will have a $2.4 million fund balance. Quite a different story. And rather than a negative 1.4 million, we're going to have a roughly positive 1.4 million. So again, we will adjust 2021, we will adjust 2022, 2023 to continue to have that positive fund balance of 6%. But what this really tells us is that we can not just move forward assuming that we can do the same thing we've always done. We have to every year go through the process of determining, what do we have to do in order to provide the education for kids that we have based upon the circumstances we have. So there is that variation. So when people look at that and go, oh my goodness, you're going to be almost $2 million in the hole. Won't happen. Just will not happen that way.
I would just also add that with your budget projections, you're assuming that we know what enrollment is going to be.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
given the nature of the situation, our enrollment could drastically different from what you have, what you've prepared. And that is why we have the fund balance, is so that we are able to cover costs and we are able to meet the contract requirements of the staff that we have, agreed to employ, is because we have that fund balance.
Correct. Fund balance is, a very important factor because you'll see that, we are using that fund balance over time. It isn't that we just continually allow it to grow larger and larger. It gets us through these times when our revenue is not as high as our expenditures, and it gives us time to adjust is really what it does to make those changes that we need to. Capital Projects Fund, very similar concept is, assuming that we have a levy for that time frame of about 2.25 million, we're going to spend whatever is available, and it fluctuates depending upon how much of the projects we get done on an annual basis. But it's roughly, we're going to collect 2.2 million, we're going to spend 2.2 million is the general concept for capital projects. Debt service is, for the next 4 years, we're going to transfer funds from the capital projects fund. And at the end of that time, there will be no more fund balance because there will be no more expenditure in the debt service fund. And as a point for those that haven't been on the board for a long time, we have no real debt. We have no bonds for buildings. We paid those off years ago. So other than that one loan from the state for the energy upgrades that the energy savings themselves are paying for, this is the only debt that we actually have, and it will be gone by 2024. ASB, I just moved the same budget basically across for 4 years. Again, it's things that the students are going to have to rework and come up with, but it's a budget holder is all it really is. And Transportation Vehicle Fund, again, looking at our depreciation schedule, as we buy buses, we can increase the depreciation amount. As buses fall off the depreciation schedule, because it's been the 13 years, it decreases the amount. So based on that, predicting about 108,000, 90,000, 90,000. So we could probably buy 2 buses next year, nothing the following year, maybe a large bus, a small bus the following year, that type of thing. So it just gives you an idea of what we have to look at as far as our buses. And one of the things we need to look at buses is, how many are left on depreciation, what type of funding does it come? Because you don't want to get to a position, which they had done in this district at one time, where they went out and bought used buses with no depreciation. And they received no reimbursement from the state. And when those buses wore out, they had no funds. So it's just one of those processes we want to keep an eye on to make sure that we're continually receiving funding so we can continually replace the older buses. There's a lot more documentation on our website. So if anybody's interested, there's the official OSPI document that will break down all the programs, and within each program, the activities, the object codes, all those type detail information that if anybody likes that, it's there. The F203 is there, which is a revenue generation program. There's also the F195, which is the 4-year projection program, but all the OSPI documentation is there if anybody chooses to look at that. Any questions I can answer for anybody at this point?
Dan, I have a couple for you.
Yeah.
So we're looking at having the possibility of less students next year. And I'm trying to calculate where are we going to be planning for that as far as the reduction in funding based on students. We already know that we got hit with that 830,685 overestimate, and now we got to make up for that, which is a great thing of having our fund balance because that helps cover that. But I'm trying to figure out where we stand with the possibility of fewer students and how that's going to relate to our, or how you did relate that to our projections for next year.
At this point, this budget does not reflect fewer students or any adjustments made because of fewer students or any adjustment made due to the method of instruction that we provide. So
I'm talking about riding the bus, since we may not have on the bus. You follow me?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So at this point, we're assuming in this budget process that we have kids riding the bus. OSBI seemed to think that they were working on ways of trying to make us, and I won't call it whole because it isn't, but ways of funding it so that we get as much funding as possible. If we don't have kids riding the buses, then we need to make adjustments. And, you know, we will look at expenditures. One of the things that we have done, knowing that we really didn't want to change our enrollment numbers too much, is we have positions where people have left the district and we haven't filled yet. So we have some leeway on the expenditure side of things. And again, it really depends on what does it look like when we hit September, because it may have a, you know, it may have an impact on the budget, not just on the revenue, but also on the expenditure side. And
Okay.
you know, I really can't speculate on that until we get a better answer of where we are and what program model that we're going to be using.
That's fair enough, Dan. You know me, I want to hold you to it. But then my next question is back to our utility expense because of the stay-at-home order on COVID-19. I'm just curious, did you do a calculation to see what we may have saved there in March, April, May, June, the differences in expenses based on that?
Yeah, I did. I don't have it with me, but it was part of the thought process, and that we can reduce the expenditures because, you know, most likely if we go to a hybrid model or any other model, there is going to be most likely less time that we have to heat the building. So that was,
So I was just curious if you did use those in your calculations, and you did. So that answers that.
yes.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I have one more, but I need to figure out exactly how to ask it, and I may just skip it, but I'll let somebody else hit you with anything if they have anything.
Hey, Dan, this is Charlie. Just curious, at this point, what does the enrollment look like for the incoming kindergarten class in terms of numbers?
Joe, have you heard anything recent on that? Because I'm not sure. I know they were down. I just don't know what the latest is.
We're still at about 50% of what we would expect. Last count, and Susie, you know, you can certainly text me if you've got something different, but the last we talked, it was about 40 kids.
Okay.
And we were expecting 80. And we're going to talk about, obviously, I'll give you a preliminary feeling for what programming will look like in the fall tonight. And we'll also talk about FTE and what the state's plans are for how that'll look once Dan's budget presentation's over.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
So first of all, Dan, this is Brooke. I'd like to thank you for incorporating some of the feedback I sent you, the questions I put in. I particularly found the comparison between what we had budgeted for this year 2 years ago and what was actually happening this year. I found that particularly useful, and I think it's useful for the community also to see how those change based on what you do in reaction to the actualities of what happens. So I think that was really helpful, and I want to thank you for putting the work in to put that together. You covered just about all of my questions, which was wonderful. I also loved seeing that there were some 46% decrease in expenditures for the board of directors. I think it's great that we can drop that amount that we can spend on the board. Love to see that cost trending downward however it can. That's great. I wonder if you could go into a little bit if there are any particular dangers that you see of us taking fund balance out of the capital projects fund going forward. If that's something we can plan for ahead of time, or if that's something that we're doing now to make up less money in other places.
Yeah, well, first, it's an allowable expense.
Right.
So that was not the issue. In the past, we've done both. We previously had a capital projects director totally paid out of capital projects, while we also had a facility director paid out of the general fund.
Okay.
But now that we only have one position, and part of the time is being spent on those activities, it made sense to utilize that fund for that purpose. Same thing with technology. If we didn't have the capital projects fund and the technology dollars, we probably wouldn't need as much support.
Right.
So again, allowable sources. At this point, I think they make a lot of sense to come out of capital projects. And we can evaluate that, every year. It really has to do with, if we do better in the general fund and we decided that we'd rather pay it out of there, we can. But
Okay.
it made sense for this particular year and to help get us through where we're going to do that. Again, it didn't affect the instructional program. That's really what the whole intent was. How do we maintain what we're doing there, but also reduce some of our expenditures?
No, and you've done a fantastic job of doing that. Looking through this budget, I like the instructional costs have gone up clearly, and you've done a wonderful job of finding other places where you can take it down. I was just curious if there was a specific risk associated with putting more of that burden on the capital funds.
The only risk is if at some point we don't have a capital projects levy.
Okay.
And then we're going to have to pull those costs back into the general fund.
Okay.
But
Perfect.
again, plenty of time to plan for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to be up to date on what those risks were. I think it's a good risk. I think you've clearly planned for it and given us time to react to it. I think that's all that I had. I would love to, and this isn't for you, this is more for the board as a whole. I would love to see at some point in, probably not this budget since we're voting on it tonight, but in a future budget, I would love to see line items for equity training, explicit line items for equity training. And if we have to do a hybrid or distance learning model this coming year or in future, line items for training for our instructors for that purpose. Because I think that we need to put our money where our mouth is. We talk about these things, we need to fund them.
So I believe, Dan, we do have money in professional development.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
We do.
Yeah.
Normally, the budget doesn't identify at this level, didn't identify the use of those funds. Otherwise, you're going to see a 6,500 line budget.
Right,
which is what I see in my accounting system. And in there, I can have a line item that's, I can label it
perfect.
equity training, whatever.
Perfect.
But at this level, you're not normally going to see that line item detail. You're going to see expenditures that are services in whatever program, but you normally don't see a line item. But we can certainly insert something in there that talks about that in the future.
Yeah, I think.
And Dan, I would also add that you are likely already doing that in your budgeting. And if Southwoodby is receiving Title II funds, then those line items are outlined in the Title II plan to secure the funding already.
They are. You don't see them in the F-195 budget document that way.
Right.
You actually end up in the accounting system that way, but not the budget document that OSPI is provided.
Perfect. I just want to make sure that we're actually following through on, that we as a school board are providing the direction for the budget creation to follow through on what we say. And it sounds like we're doing it. It's just at a more tactical level than we're looking at, and that's fine by me.
Right. There's 3 days of professional training that's required by the state in the coming year. And their emphasis is really in this area.
Yeah.
And then there's also the Title II funds, which is professional development funds. There's another $35,000 there also. So there are areas in the budget where there's certainly funding to be used for professional development.
And don't forget that we have 2 teachers on special assignments whose job is specifically to work directly with teachers and train them on the models we're using around technology. So
Wonderful.
that is part of the budget and is also out of the, well, Dan, I don't want to misspeak. We fund them out of technology levy? Or, yeah. So it is directed specifically for teacher training.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And then, you know what, Dan and Dr. Joe, I'd like to add one other thing. And that is, we've been through a lot of these together. And I got to tell you, Dan, this one here in particular, with so many variables happening, I got to give you kudos for your efforts. I mean, I know there's a lot of unanswered questions, but in that same dealing with unanswered questions, even right down to how to reduce use of our buses affect maybe our depreciation schedule and or not needing buses in the future and everything else. But I just want to give you a big pat on the back, COVID style, and thank you for your guys' efforts. You guys do a fabulous job, and I appreciate it. I know the community appreciates it. And there was a couple of good questions the community had too, and I didn't want to take those away from them, although one was also very similar to mine. But again, I just wanted to say thanks. We've been through a lot, and this one's a unique one, and so kudos.
Wholeheartedly agreed.
Yep. Great job, Dan.
We'll see what September looks like.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot up in the air right now, clearly.
There is. Yes.
So we've all sat through a lot of Dan Fuhlman budget presentations over the last few years. And Dan, you are one of the rocks for the school district in terms of building a foundation, and one that I have implicit trust in and great respect. You always do a stellar job, and it allows a superintendent and everybody else to do the great work with your tutelage and your work with the budget, especially right now. It's so difficult. So thank you. So if the board doesn't have any further questions, then I am going to suspend our business meeting and have a public hearing on the budget for the 2021 school year. Does anybody has another question?
I'm going to follow up with the questions that have come in so far. Dan, if you could tell us in your projections for, are you projecting a much larger junior senior class percentage enrolling in Running Start due to the shift to online learning due to the pandemic?
No, I'm predicting based upon the past 3 years of how many kids are going to Running Start. So they're good. There certainly could be, there is no way to predict whether kids are going to go to a different online program, whether they're going to do Running Start.
Right.
The advice I received from OSBI was to basically build your model based upon past experience.
Yep.
So.
Exactly, and we will talk through that in a couple minutes. The other question that's come in around this is, in order to comply with physical distancing requirements, have we looked at repurposing other previously abandoned campuses? And if so, have we made adjustments to the budget? And I would answer that and say, no, we haven't, because if we used other campuses for our students, we'd have to staff those campuses, and we have not increased our staffing. So for example, if we wanted to physically distance a class, run it 5 days a week, and have only 10 kids in the room, we'd have to have more teachers. So we haven't looked at that in this budgeting process.
That would require us to basically double the number of teachers.
Yeah.
We were to cut the classes in half and have them go full time.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are in a budget hearing at this time. We have no further budget questions coming in at this point.
The last two questions, I believe, are not budget.
They're not budget related, so we'll answer them later.
Brooke was giving us the high sign, so we'll move those down to superintendent's response. Okay,
Well,
so then, are there any public comments for the budget? Then, do we have any questions? Any comments on the budget? Any comments on the budget? I know this is repetitive, but this is what I have to do.
It might be good to give 2 or 3 minutes just straight out because typing can take a moment.
Well, then with that, let me say something to Charlie and Brooke, being new to the board, that just a historical preference here or understanding for why we have a 6% fund balance. It used to be a lot less.
Oh, I think Damien froze.
Damien.
Hey, Damien, you look good like that.
That's a great.
You're frozen too now. Oh, we're
Face
down
face,
two.
though.
Oh, now he's back.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
It's a safety thing to keep it
Yes.
there.
Absolutely. I like the same thing in my personal finances. I want a safety net. It's imperative to have, in my opinion.
All right. There are no further comments. Then I'm going to close the public hearing and resume our business meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? Okay, motion is carried. We have no items removed. We have no action unfinished business. So we are going to vote on these memorandums independently. So memorandum 19/2050-50, approval of South Whidbey School District summer surplus list. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve memorandum 19/20-50, approval of the South Whidbey School District 2020 summer surplus list.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? There are none. The motion is carried. Memorandum 19/20-51, approval of resolution number 652-2021 budget. Do I have a move to approve?
Move
move
to
to
approve
approve.
resolution 652.
Have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Again, Dan, thank you.
Yes.
Great work. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. Memorandum 19/20-52, approval of resolution number 653, a resolution to transfer funds from the Capital Projects Fund to the Debt Service Fund. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion is carried. Memorandum D, 19/20-53, approval of the interlocal agreements with Coopville and Mount Vernon School Districts for special education. Do I have a motion?
Well, I thought Brooke would do it, but okay. Move to approve the Mount Vernon School District and South Whidbey School District local interagreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion,
Julie, I will be recusing on this.
okay? No discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And one recuse. Okay, motion is carried. Memorandum E 19/20-54, approval of Elementary North Campus additional sidewalk summer 2020. Do I have a motion, please?
Move to approve memorandum 19/20-54.
Have a second?
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion is carried. Memorandum F, 19/20-55, approval of the elementary school play structures re-roofing project summer 2020. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion is carried. Okay. We are now on to public comments.
Actually, you're on to the financial report, Julie.
Oh, we are. We skipped that. Sorry, Dan. The Dan show.
She just
It's
wants
the
to get
Dan
out
show
of here.
tonight.
The Dan show. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you had enough. I'll be quick on this one. So this is our financial report through June. We're about 83% of the way through the year. Revenue at about 17.2 million is 82%. So we're right in line with that. If you look at the revenue by month, it's almost identical to last year, except for the 2 months that we have levy collections, and we know that because we're collecting less in revenue there. Next. We have collected most of our local property taxes, most of our local support non-tax, which is good because school's not in operation anymore. We still have some funding from the state and the federal government to receive, but it gives you an idea on the bottom part where the funding has been. Basically the big difference is the state funding has increased where the local property taxes have decreased. Next. Year-to-date expenditures, these are actually less than I would expect this time of the year, but it's because of the fact that we haven't had substitutes and some of the other things that we would normally have in a typical year. Our payroll is at about 81%, and our non-employee costs is only at about 66%. So there's been some reductions which actually allowed us to create a little higher fund balance than I would have anticipated for this year. Next. So we look at the total expenditures with encumbrances, about 96% of our budget. So we're not going to spend the entire amount. And you can see that, payroll at 97%, not anticipating a lot of additional costs in there that aren't already part of a contract. And then the MSOCs are about 86%. If we look at the historical monthly expenditures, I found this interesting, but starting in September, we were basically a little higher than we had been in the previous year, all the way through February, and then we hit March. And you'll see that March, April, May is less than 18-19, and June is substantially less than last year. So that gives you an example of, in the budget process, some of the things I was thinking about that may affect the coming budget and some of our costs in the coming year, that there was a difference there, and it indirectly speaks to Damien's question that he had brought up. Next. Fund balance. You can see the amount is higher than we've had, but if we look at the percentage, which is more important because our fund balance is a percentage of expenditures, you can see that we're in line with previous years, but actually took a little bit of a rise in June because of less expenditures than we normally would have had. I expected it would have been a little bit below that blue line because it was following a very similar pattern. Next, budget status report. We've generated about 17.2 million, spent about 16.9 million, and our current fund balance is 2,650,000. And the other four funds, capital projects. Go ahead and go next. Capital projects has almost $1.5 million in there, but there are projects going on. The debt service fund has about $1,600. We've made all the payments for the year, so there's no additional costs going out of there. The student body fund has a little over 43,000 in there, and that's one that we're going to have to pay attention to in the coming year. And then the fund balance in transportation vehicle is 64,000, and we'll receive another 100 and some thousand in August as our final depreciation payment for the year. Any questions on the current month's financials? Perfect. I turn it over to Joe.
Well, thank you, Dan.
You were fast. That was
Yeah.
great. Okay, so we are back now to our superintendent's report.
And I just had to take a minute and tell Dan that he is awesome. He really always does such a great job. And it really does make the job of being superintendent that much, well, it's not easy, but it makes it a lot easier having Dan working on the finances for us. So I'm going to give you some updates because unfortunately, we are in a different place with COVID-19 than we were in June. So I want to start there. Back in late June, all of the superintendents in the ESD 189 were talking together, and several of us signed on to a letter that went off to the governor, because at that time, and I've said this to many people, that was then, this is now. At that time, the American Association of Pediatricians had come out with a little bit different recommendation in terms of the need for social distancing in the classroom. And so we asked for a little bit of flexibility when feasible for social distancing from the 6-foot recommendation to something less than that when feasible. If today I were writing that letter, I would not write that letter. I would absolutely not ask for that, because the situation with COVID-19 has again changed dramatically since that time. And it seems when you look at it in normal times, the end of June to where we are right now isn't that many weeks, but in terms of the progression of this virus, it's a very different time again. Conversation today with Island County Health. There have been 36 new cases since we went to phase 3, which was only back in mid-June. We're now getting 2 to 3 a day. And it's the largest group is the 20 to 39-year-olds. And in Island County, we actually have an infant less than a year old that's now has the virus. So again, a very different situation. Back at the end of June when school ended, OSPI was, hands in the air talking about getting back to face-to-face instruction in September, and how could we do that? Again, it's 6 weeks away from now, or 5.5 weeks. So I don't have an answer for how is it going to look in September, but I will tell you that we are planning for various scenarios. And tomorrow there will be a survey that goes out to individual families, asking them specifically, given today's information, what they would want to do for their particular child. So our timeline, so that folks that are listening in can get a real sense of what our timeline is. Last week we spent with our team. We were back from being on break, and again, we talked about what are the options, what's everybody else looking at. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Talked about a hybrid option. We talked about a fully online option for families. We also have an option that provides a teacher mentor, is what we're calling it. And we call it remote learning, but it is not online completely. So there are even different variations of what remote learning could look like. At any rate, we've brainstormed that. We've put this information into a survey. We've met with the South Whidbey Education Association. We're meeting again with them tomorrow. We've kept each other up to date on what's happening. I met with the classified staff, one of the classified staff unions today. So we're keeping everybody up to date in terms of our in-house staff. The survey that's going out to parents is to give parents opportunity to see what we're thinking about. We're going to convene an advisory team next week with, we're going to give a call to some parents who have been very active with PTA and so on, and get their input. And then as we receive those surveys back, we'll at least get a sense of where people are. When we did this survey back in June, again, a very different picture, but even then 30% of the people said they really didn't want to bring their child back to school in September. Part of that 30% was because they didn't want their child to have to wear a mask, and the other part was because they were worried that people wouldn't wear masks. So it was a very different time, even though it was only a few weeks ago. After next week, we're going to start looking at the surveys, but the thing we're going to look at first and foremost, our goal, our first priority, is the safety of our staff and our students, and that will govern all of the decisions that we make. And we will make those decisions based on science and guidance from CDC and the Washington State Department of Health and our own Island County Public Health. We know we must provide a robust education for our students. We know that we have to improve and change what we did in the spring in terms of our online instruction. And we also have other options we're talking about. We're putting up the Island Shakespeare tent. They're lending us to us for the year so that we could potentially have outdoor spaces for students. We're getting, you just approved re-roofing the elementary outdoor space. Again, these are all of the things that we're doing to prepare. It doesn't mean that we will have every option available in September, because that will depend on what the virus is doing. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are. I know we have questions coming in around that. And I will address them. So one of the questions that we have in the Q&A right now is about distance learning. How does distance learning impact the definition of FTE? Is it possible to appeal to more families in the community to enroll or re-enroll in the district through an ongoing hybrid or on-campus or expanded South Whidbey Academy option? And could that potentially increase enrollment? Yes, yes, yes. We are looking at those options. And one of the things that we know about budgeting and enrollment, and Dan, please jump in, is that the state and the State Board of Education and OSPI have modified how they will look at days and hours. We need to have 180 days, but that doesn't necessarily mean students in school 180 days. They are looking at, for example, if we did a hybrid option and said our students would be face-to-face with teachers 2 days a week, and then working on teacher-directed work 3 days a week, but not on campus, that would count as a full-time student. So there are different ways of counting students than just taking attendance in class in a school building. So we're taking that into account also. So yes, we want to appeal to as many families as possible to do what we can to educate children. At this time, we have not made a decision on whether or not we will be face-to-face, but I will tell you that it's looking less and less likely that in September we will be able to open face-to-face if this disease continues with the trend it has currently taken. So again, wearing masks, staying home, staying socially distanced is critical to all of us. But everything I'm hearing from the health department and at the state level indicates that if we don't, as a society, follow those practices, we're unlikely to be able to reduce the rate of infection. Any questions on that I can help with right now? I know there are questions coming in on equity and Black Lives Matter, and we'll get to those, but I want to talk about any questions that the board may have, certainly on where we're headed in September and thoughts out there that you have.
Yeah, so Joe, just something that I hear quite a bit, some questions, and it's kind of more tactical at this point, but on the hybrid model for those parents that have, multiple kids, multiple students in the district, is there thought that goes into that of having those students be aligned on the same day, right? So you wouldn't have
Yes.
a first grader going on a Monday and then they have like a fifth grader going in on a Tuesday.
Totally,
I constantly get
totally. Yep. We're going to do it first and foremost by alphabet. So, maybe the entire, this is again, conjecture. We haven't made a firm, but we'll start there. There may be families who have students with different last names, but we'll adjust for that. But we'll start with, if Ada G comes in on Monday, Tuesday, then H through Z would come on Thursday, Friday. We would have to have students in cohorts, especially at the elementary level where it's a teacher with a small group of students. We have to think about the logistics of that. But yes, we will definitely work so that families have students in school on the same day.
And then the other question I have is, more along the lines for the teachers. I mean, how in a hybrid model, how do they keep track of? I mean, you'd have kids going some days, some kids are online full time. I mean, how does that work for the teachers? It seems like that's quite a heavy lift to keep track of all that.
Well, and those are the things that we're talking about. And we're going to be meeting with the SWIA tomorrow to talk about what does it look like and how do we make it feasible?
Okay.
Do we divide a grade level and one person's doing online? Do we shorten the day and you're teaching 4 hours and you have 2 hours in a different model? So again, all of that is part of our planning because It is a heavy lift. So yeah, we're cognizant of that, and that's why we're working hand in hand with the teachers group. We're also looking at what are our classified staff able to do in terms of working with our students with special needs and our special education teachers. So we have a lot of irons in the fire, and we're working through all of that with the backdrop of, will we be able to execute when we get to September, or will we have to wait? Will we be doing some more remote at that point?
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for taking this measured wait and see approach. I think that there are a lot of school districts out there who are announcing that they're going to be, for instance, full-time K through 5, and that's not looking feasible at this point from what I've seen. So I really want to thank you and the rest of the administrative team for taking this careful approach. I know that it creates some uncertainty in the community and in the staff, but I hope that they are willing to give you and the rest of the school district the time and forbearance to come up with not just a plan, but the best plan to keep our kids and staff safe.
Thank you, Brooke. Just in terms of timeline, so people know when to expect the next piece of information. So again, we're going to be sending out a survey on the week of August 11th. You have a board workshop. I anticipate that prior to that, we'll put out our plan. And then August 11th would give, that week when the board has its workshop, it would give people the opportunity to address their concerns. We are required by RCW, or well, by an act of OSPI and the legislature, I guess, to have an approved plan prior to our start. So on your business meeting in August, we will ask for approval. So that'll give us time to adjust after the workshop if there's some tweaking to do. OSPI, and I forwarded this to the board, and folks can certainly look at OSPI's website if they want to see it. But I forwarded OSPI's guidance that came out today regarding online model, and if we open that way in the fall, and what we have to look toward making sure that we do. There are so many pieces to what we have to do to open face-to-face that we are working on, like taking temperatures when students arrive, like figuring out how they're going to do their health attestation. We have to determine how we're going to analyze students' social emotional well-being at the time they enter school, and what we can do to help with that. We have to figure out our essential learning standards and what we're going to focus on if we are going to a hybrid model. So there are many, many things that are in the works. So thank you for understanding that it's a ton of work that we're engaged in at this point. And we knew, that's why we took time right after school ended to take a break. And now we're back at it and going forward.
So Dr. Mocha, there are several Q&As regarding
anything else on, let me take a look and see if there's anything on opening.
there are.
Okay, so I'll work through those. Does the board have any questions while I take a look at that?
I think it's important for everybody to realize that this is a very fluid time. And the best thing that we could be doing is examining all of those options and looking at all of those options, because as we become closer to the time when school will open, you need to have all of those things in your toolkit so that you can pull out the best plan to ensure the safety and education of kids and the safety of staff. So I know what you're doing. It's frustrating to people, and we want an answer, we want it now, we need to be able to plan, but unfortunately, we can't control the virus. Nobody can.
No, and
being prepared is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, I'm going to, I'll start to address the questions. We have one here. I'm concerned that we are looking at these options when school is 7 weeks away. Yeah, school was, we had no weeks to plan in March, and we were able to turn our focus to remote learning. 7 weeks, we can put an awesome educational program together for September, and it's not that we have to reinvent the entire wheel. We know what the options are. We just have to determine which one or several we're going to implement and who's going to do that. And that takes some planning, and we have 7 weeks to do that planning. So I feel confident that we'll be there. Let's see, let me go back to the top. How will you be communicating this to the entire community rather than just currently enrolled students, giving non-enrolled families the opportunity? Wow, it just jumped, sorry. The opportunity to decide if South Whidbey model will be one in which they will move to. I actually, that's a great question, and I'm going to work with Christy on that, because she's our Director of Communications, and we will figure out how we're going to get the word out. I know folks are talking about it. We can certainly figure out ways to communicate what we're offering to families beyond just those enrolled in the district. You are inviting parents to stay. How are parents allowed to proactively support and ensure that our child has all the options available if the district is still considering options? But we're going to consider health and safety first. The options that I described are available if we're going to be in face-to-face instruction. So the question really is, will we be able to operate in face-to-face and do a hybrid model and do these things that we want to do, or will we be remote? And that question, it's too soon to give an answer to that question. I would like to do dual enrollment through South Whidbey School District, but I'm concerned that I will not be permitted, or if permitted, my child will not be enrolled in time in the virtual option through Spokane. Is that Spokane? I'm not sure what SPS is. I don't know what that acronym is. SPS. I know we have Spokane Virtual. So
Might be Spokane Public Schools or Seattle Public Schools.
yeah, Seattle Public Schools, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the individual means. If it's Spokane Virtual, we are engaged with them. So we can do these things. Certainly, if individuals have questions, the best bet is to email me directly, and we will get your questions answered.
Yeah, it looks like she said Spokane Virtual Schools. That's what she had.
Okay. So yeah, that, thank you. Spokane Virtual. Yeah, absolutely. That, just email me directly and we can talk about what it is that you're looking for specifically. Okay. Anything else that you see on opening school? I'll get to it if I don't. We have some questions on, I have a question on Black Lives Matter sign. It's still in process. I got an update today. We don't have it in our hands yet. When we do, it will be going up by the tennis courts. So you will see it as soon as we have it in our hands. Ethnic studies class. Actually, we are talking about developing an ethnic studies class. There's a question here about that. We've looked over ideas. We have folks working on that. Appreciate the input here. So we will put that that input into the hands of the people working on that. Can we get a credentialed Black History class online or in class? Again, these are things that are in process. We won't have anything in September, but we're working on that process. What is the plan for eliminating the N-word if school resumes as per Jackson's letter? We will continue to work on our culture with our students and our staff to eliminate the N-word and other pejorative terms. That is the whole point of our cultural shift. Gotta thank you for your tireless efforts. Thank you for saying that. Let's see. Answered the Black Lives Matter sign, got that answered. Thank you, Ian, for helping me out with questions. Okay. So we are working on equity. Our first priority right now is how, both things are a priority, but how we're gonna open school is on our immediate front burner, and equity and how we're working on that is on the front burner right next to it. So we're doing both of those, working on both of those things. Okay. So I'm going to move on from the questions, if that's okay. And I would like
one more that popped up there.
Is there one more? Oh, it's a statement. Family partnership supports equitable access to education. Thank you.
Other than that, I'd say I really liked your back burner with the side, or the front burner with the side burner. That was good, Joe.
Yeah. Thanks, Damien. You're full of compliments tonight. That's awesome. Thank you.
Well, I don't have the audience to actually, interact with like I normally do.
That's true. So
You guys are the audience.
I want to digress for just a minute. It's with deep regret that we all received Julie's letter today, indicating that she really is going to step away from the board. I have to admit that I twisted her arm and got her to agree to stay through August 31st. So thank you, Julie, for staying through August 31st.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, we continue to recruit. I was on equity training yesterday and indicated that we do have an opening. on the board and would love to have, as Julie said, certainly a person of color, if someone is out there willing to lend us their time and expertise and participate on the board. But because Julie extended her time, the board has 90 days from the date of her effective resignation, which is August 31st. So you basically have September, October, November to fill the seat. So that, appreciate that, Julie, very much. And I want to thank Julie for 6 years of dedicated service to this board, to the students and the staff, and certainly the community of South Whidbey School District. Julie has provided her knowledge and her expertise and her vast experience to support not only the superintendent, but the district, and to get us to a better place. So I want to extend a thank you to Julie on behalf of the staff of the district for her service to the district. And we will truly miss your leadership. So I really wish you'd think again, but I know I got 2 months from where you wanted to be. So Julie, thank you for staying through August.
Thank you, Joe. And thank the board for, I don't know if you guys know this, but I got something really special today. It's a little clock and it says, thank you for your 6.5 years. And it's got the logo in there. So I appreciate that. And then I also got these. You see my flowers? Yeah. So anyway, thanks you guys. That's very kind. I'm not going anywhere, as you know. I'm just moving on to something different. I've done every job from instructional aide to superintendent of a school district, and it's time for me to pass that baton. My work as a university professor has exploded, and it's just taking up way too much of my time. So I need to let some things go. And I think this is a really nice time for the board and this district. You're stable now. You've got wonderful leadership. You guys are all doing a fabulous job. So, you know, I'm always here to help. If you want an ear or some advice, I'm pretty good with that. But I have a lot of confidence in the direction of this district. And I know you're in great hands with Joe and Dan and Christy and everybody that puts everything together, and particularly with this board. You're a good team. So thank you guys for putting up with me.
Julie, I'd just like to say that so that everybody understands that you are able to extend your time serving on the South Whidbey School District Board of Directors up until the actual minute that you no longer do. So we all have an extended time. And I see that clock that you received, which is a good indication of the time that we have to talk to you some more about extending your time, just so that everybody knows that that can happen. You can continue to do that. And I really don't want you to go, Julie. I do not want you to leave. I enjoy your company, your presence, and being in your company. So I just want you to know that you don't need to go.
Thank you.
We can work this out.
I would also agree with Damien's sentiment. Julie, I don't want you to go, but I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, and Julie, thank you. I mean, coming on the board new, you know, thinking I know things, and that, you know, you pulled me to the side a couple of times here and there and kind of guided me back on the right path and stuff. And so I really appreciate all your guidance. And
I know where your mother works too. So.
That's right. But no, I honestly, I do. I mean, I want you to know I have taken your input, and I always value everything that you say. And I just can't thank you enough, you know, for all your help. And
well, you got two new rookies here, and you guys are great, solid board members, and you know I appreciate what you've done. I mean, it's a very tough job, and I was glad to see that Kira Erickson was online tonight, and I was glad to see that they wrote that article in the South Whidbey Record today, so that will draw attention to the fact that this is an open seat, and it is, you know, it's one of the gold seats. It can be anybody from South Whidbey School District. It's not a designated geographic spot. So those of you that are interested, if you have questions, feel free to email me, feel free to email the superintendent or any of the other board members. We'd be happy to talk to you about it, because we need good representation to do the work for the kids, because this is a fabulous, fabulous school district.
I want to echo what Charlie said, and thank you, Julie, for the leadership, the strong leadership you've shown in the 6 months that however long it's been since I've been here. You haven't taught me math, but you've taught me leadership and provided advice and guidance, and I very much appreciate it.
You're welcome, Brooke. You guys have been a great addition.
You're not getting a clock, Brooke.
All right, do we have any other board comments before we adjourn? Anything else for the good of the cause?
I would add one thing that maybe we should look at now that we're maybe getting a little bit more and more into this, and I'm not sure how to say this, but do we want to continue with the format of the Q&A for the superintendent, or would we like to go back to the format of having the ability for people to address the board somehow or another in a short, readable statement that we can take from them? I'm just throwing it out there, and we don't have to make the decision tonight or anything. I mean, I'm just throwing it out for future discussion in future meetings. So,
well, personally, I like the immediacy of the back and forth that we can get a little bit here without it getting too off topic. And I think that that's actually really valuable, especially when we don't have workshops where we can get direct input in that sort of fashion. So I think while we're online, I think that it's really valuable to have the immediate responses from the community.
I would agree, Brooke.
Yep.
And right now it's manageable, it's working well. And, you know, it gives people a response. And if it's not an in-depth response, then Joe or Dan knows that, you know, there's going to be follow-up coming, and it gives them an opportunity to go back and follow up with more information. So good comment. All right, if there's nothing else then.
Yeah, so Julie, I'll just kind of end with this, and I know, Joe, you kicked it off in the beginning. I just, you know, our thoughts and prayers go out to Taylor Daniels' family and his brother, you know, Nevin, who was a part of that tragic accident. So I just incredibly sad about the whole thing. So thoughts and prayers are with the family.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, Charlie. Thank you. All right, with that, folks, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.